This video is brought to you by my website, eraparts.com, high quality, genuine auto parts. In this video, I'm going to be replacing all of the mounts in a 2012 Ford Focus. This only has 3 mounts. It has 2 engine mounts, one transmission mount. Now it's got the right hand engine mount, which is on the passenger side, a torque strip mount underneath the car, and a transmission mount. I've worked on a lot of 90s cars in my day, and a lot of them didn't have this type of engine mount setup. A lot of the more modern vehicles use this type of engine mount setup, where there's only 3 and it seems to work just fine. Without further ado, let's go right into this job. Now this underguard needs to be removed. There's a couple of Torx bolts that need to be removed. No problem, just have some arrows pointing at them. Get those right off. Now these aren't all of them, but these are the front ones that are in plain view. You'll get all of them off. Now once you remove that, you have access to the oil pan, and I'm just going to be supporting the oil pan with my jack and a block of wood. Don't support it here because that's where the AC compressor is. You don't want to damage the AC compressor. We'll jack it up by the oil pan. This is where I'm going to be jacking it up. Now we're up top, and we're going to be removing the coolant overflow tank. And it really just pops off. I'll show you in just a moment here. The engine mount is underneath it. That's the location of it. You can see it's got a bunch of stuff on it. I can't tell if that was antifreeze or oil from the engine mount, but either way it needs to be replaced. This is where the overflow tank attaches. Remember, there's no bolts, it just lifts up. And of course that line is flexible, so I'm not even going to remove that. I'm just going to pop it out of its support and move it out of the way. That's it. That's all I'm going to do. Now I have an 18mm for the 2 top bolts, a 15mm for the lower bolts that attach to the body. There's one down there as well where you see that arrow, and we're just going to remove them. Now remember, make sure your jack is supporting the engine. So I'm actually going to double check my jack here to make sure it's supporting, because you'll notice as you start taking those bolts off, if your engine isn't supported properly, it's going to get a little tight and it might actually pop out of place, and that's just not a comfortable feeling. So make sure your jack is supporting the engine. As you can see, it's starting to move a little bit as I'm removing those bolts. Now it's all loose and I can wiggle the engine mount out. Now you'll notice this engine mount has this housing around it. You'll see some vendors will sell the entire mount with the housing. Other vendors, like my company, only sells the actual mount itself, as you see on the right hand side. There's no need to replace the bracket. I've had some people return mounts because they thought that it's all one piece and it's just not the right one and it doesn't fit. You actually bend those tabs out. There's no need to be replacing the aluminum part because it doesn't wear out unless it's broken or something like that. So they bend pretty easily. You'll just remove the old one and get that new one right in. As you can see, I have it in place and I just need to bend those over. I just use a mallet. You can use a hammer or anything to just bend them over and make sure it's nice and secure. And I would normally cut away from this clip, but I'm just giving you some close-up angles so you can see the position and where everything is positioned at, so you know and have a good idea of, make sure you're putting it in the correct position. Now it's all in place, it's all bent in. Didn't get an actual footage of me hammering it in because that would be boring. And now it's going right back in. It's a reverse process. If you're curious about the torque specs, I'll have them in the video description so you can easily view them instead of having to navigate your way all through the video to try to find those type of things. You just kind of wiggle it in place. I left some of these clips here just to kind of show you that it takes a little bit to wiggle it in place sometimes. Now, of course, if you want to change your belts as well, this isn't the worst time to do it, but it's not hard to remove this mount. So as you can see, it's not perfectly lined, so you can just move the engine back and forth by hand, or with your jack you can take the handle and move it back and forth carefully. Carefully is the key word. And that is it for the right hand mount. I hate to be one of those YouTubers that say this is easy, but this is easy. Now, yes, there's a million things that can go wrong. Broken bolt, messed up threads that can have you here for hours or days trying to fix this. I've been there and done that. Any regular run-of-the-mill job can turn into nightmare on Elm Street. Okay, I know, but the process is very simple and straightforward. This mount is the one that carries the heaviest part of the motor as well, so it will wear out faster than the other ones, and you will get some of that weird vibration or noises and stuff like that. Treat it like tires basically. It's rubber, it does wear out, and it's just part of its design. Now, here is the torque strut mount. It's in this position where you see that arrow. I kind of have the camera back a little bit so you can get an idea of where it's at. And here we are up close where all the bolts are. There's just these bolts right here and underneath to remove them. Fun fact, a lot of Ford Focus owners, the enthusiast side of this, tend to replace this mount with the Ford Focus electric mount, which is the exact same one, and it actually does fit. If you find it on my website, you can try that out. That's for people who drive their car a little bit more spirited, a little bit faster. They say it eliminates wheel hop and things like that. It will make it stiffer though, so just keep that in mind. If you're looking for something to kind of eliminate wheel hop or something like that, that's something you can check out. We've got that bolt removed. There's a little bit of rust on it, not so bad, but if you are in the rust belt, there's going to be a lot of rust, so I would prepare for some sort of fight with that. So just beware, be ready. Now I got the bracket out behind the engine mount because I was unable to remove the engine mount. Without removing that, no worries, there's just a few more bolts to remove. And as you can see, the location of these bolts, they are not the same length. So let's just take a look at where each one goes. The shorter one will go right there as you see, and the longer bolt will go in another location. And here's our engine mount. It's not actually very worn. I actually ended up replacing all of the mounts in this case. So if this is you notice that it's not worn, hey, you don't have to replace it, but if you do, the video is available for you. I ended up doing all of them for that reason, because in that case, if you've been driving it for a while, usually the other ones do wear out. And here's a close-up of the bolts behind it. Got the new mount in. Just tighten it all down and you're done. Now on to the transmission mount. I don't really know what to say for this part. Remove the negative cable first from the battery, at least. This one I actually struggled with, only because a lot of the plastic is kind of finicky a little bit to try to get it to pop all into place properly. I got some close-up shots so you can get an idea of what to expect. Otherwise, all you're doing is just removing the air box, the battery trays, which really is not the hardest thing to do in the world, but it's just kind of tedious to get all the little plastic pieces to pop back into place where they're supposed to. I'm going to remove the air filter with some clean gloves. I try to advise people not to grab the air filter with dirty, oily hands. Probably is fine, but yeah, just don't do that. Moving that battery support, because the battery's got to come out. And I ended up removing the mass airflow sensor. I could have actually just left it on the airbox, but ended up removing it this way instead. So So there's just multiple ways you can do this. Here's the battery tray up close. You kind of see some of the clips that plug into it. You gotta get some of that stuff off so you can get that battery out of the way. Like I said, it's not ridiculously hard or complicated. It's just tedious. It's just a bunch of plastic stuff that you gotta get off and not break too. Yeah, some of it, they always tend to break, especially on older cars, but the less broken stuff, the better. Like I said, I took it off this way. I could have just left it on the airbox, but that's what I chose to do when I did this job. And there's the airbox. Comes right up and out. There are some mounting points. I'll show you them. You can actually see them in this clip, but I'll show you when we're putting it back on. 10mm to remove these cables. Close. Kind of have these clips not in the correct order, but like I say, negative cable does come off first when you do this. And when you put it back on, the positive cable goes on first, and then the negative cable goes on last, if that makes sense. So when you remove the battery, remove the negative cable first, then the positive cable. When you install it, put the positive cable first, then the negative cable last, if that makes sense. Now, battery tray out of the way. There's 3 bolts that hold it on, and there is the transmission mount. I'm actually going to move my jack now to support the transmission side, because that's the side that needs to be supported. The engine mount's got some bolts on the top that come right off. There's not much here that needs to be said, so just enjoy the video. And now the engine mount comes out. The transmission mount. Correction. That is the transmission mount. And I'm going to reuse that steel piece in the center. It's going to go onto the new mount. Got 2 bolts, 10mm. And just take a look at the position that the new mount is going on with that steel plate on top. And that's it. You just tighten everything down. You're gonna start putting everything back together. And like I said, tedious. All of the plastic pieces that go together takes a little bit of time, but it's not complicated. It's just tedious. You just have to be patient when you do that. If you have an opportunity to clean the battery terminals, hey, why not? It's kind of out of the way when you have that battery in place, so hey, good time to do that. Now here are the mounts for the airbox here. Make sure that the airbox goes onto the mounts properly, otherwise nothing's gonna line up. You're gonna pull your hair out, and we don't want to see that. Mass airflow sensor back on. If I were to remove all this stuff again, I would just leave the mass airflow sensor on the airbox. But hey, whatever works best for you. And that's it. Everything just goes back together. There really isn't too much more special stuff. Just double check your work when you're putting this stuff back together. The air filter has a place where it seats on the air box, and make sure that you have that seated correctly. Otherwise, you won't be able to put the air box back together properly. And that's it. All of the mounts on this car have been replaced. It's not too difficult of a job. The transmission mount is probably the most tedious, not difficult, but tedious, requiring some patience with all of the plastic and all of the stuff in this area. Otherwise, you're done. If this video helped you out, make sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel, because there's actually going to be more videos on this car in particular. We really appreciate you checking out this video, and make sure to check out errorparts.com for high quality, genuine parts.